The tranquil village of Ravenswood was nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, a place where everyone knew each other and nothing much ever happened. The villagers led simple lives, their days marked by routines that had remained unchanged for generations. Children played in the fields and cobblestone streets, their laughter echoing through the air. That all changed one bleak autumn when children began to vanish without a trace. The first to disappear was Timmy O'Connor, a lively 7-year-old with a penchant for mischief. One evening after dinner, he went out to play and never came back. His mother found his toy car abandoned near the edge of the forest, the same place where he had been warned not to venture alone. The search party scoured the woods for days, but there was no sign of Timmy. The community was shaken, but they held on to hope that he had simply wandered off and would return soon. Then it was Emma, a quiet girl who loved to read under the old oak tree in the village square. She was last seen sitting with her nose in a book, but by dusk she was nowhere to be found. Her parents' desperate cries for help brought the villagers together once more, but like Timmy, Emma had vanished without leaving a clue. Fear began to seep into the hearts of Ravenswood's residents, and children were kept indoors as much as possible. Panic spread like wildfire, and whispers of foul play grew louder with each passing day. Mothers clutched their children tighter, and fathers doubled the locks on their doors. The once warm and inviting atmosphere of Ravenswood grew tense and somber, shadows of fear lurking in every corner. In the heart of the village stood an old toy shop, its windows filled with lifelike dolls that seemed to stare out with hauntingly real eyes. The shop belonged to Mr. Grimaldi, a reclusive doll maker who seldom ventured outside. His presence was a familiar yet unsettling fixture in Ravenswood. With his gaunt figure, piercing gaze, and the slow, deliberate way he moved, Mr. Grimaldi had always been the subject of local legends and whispered suspicions. Parents had always warned their children not to bother the old man, whose grim demeanor and air of mystery made him a natural scapegoat for anything unusual that happened in the village. Despite these warnings, the children were often drawn to the toy shop, mesmerized by the intricate dolls displayed in the window. Each doll was unique, crafted with an unsettling level of detail that made them almost lifelike. As the number of missing children grew, so did the unease among the villagers. With each disappearance, a new doll appeared in Mr. Grimaldi's shop window, eerily resembling those who had vanished. Timmy's likeness stood near the entrance, his eyes wide with what seemed like eternal surprise. Emma's doll was placed delicately on a shelf, her tiny hands clutching a miniature book. The coincidences were too glaring to ignore, and suspicion quickly turned towards Mr. Grimaldi. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, their conversations filled with fear and speculation. They avoided the toy shop, crossing the street to steer clear of its shadowy presence. But no one dared confront the doll maker directly. The fear of what they might uncover was too great. Meanwhile, in the quiet home of the Petersons, 12-year-old Sarah clung to a growing sense of dread. Her brother, Ben, was the latest to disappear. Ben had always been fascinated by the dolls, often pressing his nose against the toy shop's glass, admiring their craftsmanship. Sarah's heart ached with worry, but she was determined to find him. Unlike the other villagers, she refused to be paralyzed by fear and instead resolved to uncover the truth behind the disappearances. Sarah knew that the connection between the missing children and Mr. Grimaldi's dolls could no longer be ignored. She decided to take matters into her own hands, vowing to bring her brother back and put an end to the horror that had gripped Ravenswood. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Sarah prepared herself for the daunting task ahead, her resolve strengthened by love and desperation. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Sarah crept out of her house and made her way to the toy shop. She pressed her ear against the door, listening for any sound that might give her a clue about her brother's whereabouts. Summoning all her courage, she slipped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The shop was filled with dolls of all sizes, their eyes following her every move. In the eerie silence, Sarah could almost hear them whispering. As she took her first steps into the dimly lit shop, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she was about to uncover something terrible, something that had been hidden beneath the surface of Ravenswood for far too long. Sarah's breath was shallow, her flashlight trembling in her hand as she scanned the dimly lit toy shop. The dolls seemed even more lifelike up close, their glass eyes glinting in the beam of her flashlight. She steeled herself, pushing past her fear, knowing she had to find any clue that could lead her to Ben. The shop was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Sarah moved carefully among the shelves, each one crowded with dolls of all shapes and sizes. Some were smiling, others wore blank expressions, but the ones that most unnerved her were those that seemed to be frozen in expressions of fear. Her heart ached as she imagined Ben's face among them. As she ventured deeper into the shop, she noticed a peculiar pattern. Each of the new dolls that resembled the missing children had a small hand-carved pendant around their neck, bearing a strange symbol. She took a closer look at the symbol, tracing its intricate lines with her finger, feeling a shiver run down her spine. It seemed ancient and powerful, a stark contrast to the innocent toys surrounding it. Sarah's attention was drawn to a faint glow coming from behind a large, ornate cabinet at the back of the shop. She approached it cautiously, her hand reaching out to touch the intricate woodwork. With a deep breath, she pushed the cabinet aside, revealing a hidden door. The door was old and weathered, the wood splintering under her touch. She hesitated for a moment, fear gripping her, but the thought of Ben gave her the strength to proceed. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder, and the smell of damp earth and mold wafted up from below. Heart pounding, Sarah descended the steps, each creak amplifying her fear. The staircase seemed to go on forever, winding down into the depths of the building. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, its weak beam the only thing piercing the thick darkness around her. At the bottom of the stairs, Sarah found herself in a large basement. The room was a stark contrast to the quaint toy shop above. It was filled with shelves lined with ancient tomes, jars of strange herbs, and tools that looked more suited to a medieval torture chamber than a toy shop. A cold draft made her shiver, and the only light came from flickering candles placed sporadically around the room, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. In the center of the basement stood a large circular table, and atop it lay a half-finished doll that looked disturbingly like her brother. As she approached, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper reached her ears, sending chills down her spine. She could hear Ben's voice, weak and distant, calling her name. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, determined to stay focused. On a workbench cluttered with strange objects, she found a collection of ancient books. Their pages were filled with drawings and descriptions of dark rituals and spells. One book in particular caught her eye. It was open to a page detailing a soul transference ritual. Her eyes scanned the text, her horror growing with every word. Mr. Grimaldi was using dark magic to capture the souls of the children, trapping them within his dolls to give them a twisted form of eternal life. Sarah's mind raced. She had to find a way to break the spell and save her brother. She knew she couldn't do it alone. Clutching the book, she backed away from the table, her eyes darting around the room for anything that might help her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Just as she was about to leave, she heard a noise from the top of the stairs. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized Mr. Grimaldi was coming down. Panicking, she looked for a place to hide. She spotted a large, dusty curtain in the corner of the room and darted behind it, her breathing shallow and rapid. The footsteps grew louder, and soon Mr. Grimaldi's gaunt figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He moved with an eerie grace, his eyes scanning the room with a cold, calculating gaze. Sarah held her breath, praying he wouldn't find her. He walked over to the workbench, inspecting the items she had disturbed. His expression darkened, and Sarah knew she had little time. As soon as Mr. Grimaldi turned his back, she slipped out from behind the curtain and quietly made her way up the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, but she finally reached the top and darted out of the toy shop into the night. The cold air hit her like a wave, but she kept running, the book clutched tightly to her chest. Sarah reached her home, her mind racing with the horrors she had discovered. She knew she had to act quickly to save Ben. Gathering her courage, she decided to seek help from the one person who might know how to combat the dark magic at play, Father Matthias, the village priest who was known for his knowledge of ancient lore and rituals. As the first light of dawn began to break, Sarah set off for the church, determined to save her brother before it was too late. Sarah hurried through the village streets, the rising sun casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and reach for her. Her heart pounded with fear and urgency. The church loomed ahead, its steeple piercing the early morning sky. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and rushed inside, calling out for Father Matthias. The elderly priest emerged from a side room, his kind eyes widening in concern as he took in Sarah's disheveled appearance and the ancient book clutched in her trembling hands. "Sarah, my child, what has happened?" he asked, guiding her to a pew. Through tears and shaky breaths, Sarah recounted everything she had discovered in Mr. Grimaldi's basement. Father Matthias listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he took the book from her and examined the pages she had marked. "This is dark magic indeed," he said, his voice heavy with solemnity. "The symbols you described, the rituals in this book, they are ancient and powerful. We must act quickly if we are to save Ben and the other children." Father Matthias led Sarah to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the church, where he kept his own collection of ancient texts and religious artifacts. He began to search through his books, muttering to himself, as he pulled out volumes on exorcisms, purification rituals, and protective spells. The ritual to break the soul transference requires a purification spell, and we will need a personal item from Ben, Father Matthias explained. Do you have anything that belongs to him? Sarah nodded, remembering Ben's favorite toy truck. I can get it, she said, her voice resolute. It's in his room. Good, the priest replied. While you retrieve it, I will prepare the necessary materials for the ritual. Time is of the essence. Sarah raced back home, her mind focused on the task at hand. She burst into Ben's room and found the toy truck lying on the floor, just where he had left it. Clutching it tightly, she ran back to the church, where Father Matthias had set up an altar with candles, incense, and a bowl of holy water. We must be precise, Father Matthias instructed, handing Sarah a small vial of consecrated oil. Anoint the toy with this oil while I begin the incantations. Place it in the bowl when I signal you. As Father Matthias began to chant in Latin, the air in the room grew heavy, and Sarah could feel a palpable energy building. She followed his instructions, carefully anointing the toy truck with the oil and then holding it over the bowl of holy water. Now, Sarah, Father Matthias exclaimed, his voice resonating with authority. Sarah lowered the toy into the water, and as she did, a bright light erupted from the bowl, filling the room with a blinding radiance. The air vibrated with a powerful force, and Sarah could hear faint, anguished cries as the purification spell took hold. The light subsided, leaving the room in an eerie silence. Sarah looked at Father Matthias, who nodded grimly. The spell is cast. We must return to the toy shop to complete the ritual and release the souls. Together, they made their way back to Mr. Grimaldi's shop, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on their shoulders. The village was still and quiet, the early morning light casting an otherworldly glow over the cobblestone streets. They arrived at the toy shop and found the door ajar. Sarah's heart raced as she led the way down into the basement, where the half-finished doll of Ben still lay on the table. The room felt colder than before, and the presence of dark magic was almost tangible. Father Matthias began the final incantation, his voice steady and unwavering. As he chanted, the symbols on the dolls around the room began to glow, and the whispers grew louder. Sarah watched in awe and fear as the doll's eyes seemed to flicker with life. With a final powerful word, Father Matthias completed the incantation. The room was filled with a deafening roar, and the dolls shattered, releasing the trapped souls. Sarah saw Ben's spirit rise from the broken doll, his face filled with relief and gratitude. "Ben!" Sarah cried, reaching out for him. As the spirits dissipated, Ben's physical form appeared beside her, dazed but alive. He stumbled, and Sarah caught him, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now," she whispered, holding him close. Father Matthias placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "The dark magic is broken," he said, "but we must be vigilant. Evil like this can always find a way back if we are not careful." Sarah nodded, her heart filled with both relief and a newfound strength. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but she knew the village of Ravenswood would never be the same. As she and Ben walked back into the light of day, the shadows of their ordeal began to fade, replaced by the warmth of hope and the promise of a new beginning. Sarah and Ben emerged from the basement, the the weight of their ordeal still heavy on their shoulders. They were greeted by the dawn's early light filtering through the toy shop's windows. The once eerie shop now felt like a place where the darkness had been driven away. As they stepped out into the village square, they found the other children who had vanished, appearing one by one, dazed and confused but alive. Parents rushed to the scene, embracing their children with tears of joy and relief. The entire village seemed to awaken at once, drawn by the commotion and the miraculous return of the lost children. Amidst the joyful reunions, the children began to recount their harrowing experiences. They spoke of being taken by Mr. Grimaldi, whom they now referred to as the puppeteer, and of being held captive in a dark, cold place where their only company had been the lifelike dolls. The parents, their initial relief giving way to anger and a desire for justice, turned to the local sheriff, Mr. Hargrove, demanding that Mr. Grimaldi be arrested immediately. Sheriff Hargrove, a stern but fair man, listened intently to the children's stories. He nodded gravely, understanding the urgency and the villagers' demand for justice. He gathered a small group of deputies, and with Sarah leading the way, they headed back to the toy shop to apprehend the puppeteer. The shop was eerily silent as the sheriff and his men entered. They searched every corner, from the cluttered main room to the dark basement where Sarah and Father Matthias had performed the ritual. The evidence of dark magic was still evident in the scattered remnants of broken dolls and the ancient books. Yet, despite their thorough search, Mr. Grimaldi was nowhere to be found. "It's like he vanished into thin air," one of the deputies muttered, echoing the thoughts of everyone present. Sheriff Hargrove's brow furrowed in frustration. He turned to Sarah and Ben, who stood close together, watching the search with a mix of fear and hope. "Are you sure he was here when you left?" he asked. Sarah nodded vigorously. "He was here, Sheriff. He must have known we were coming and escaped." The sheriff sighed, a deep weariness settling in his eyes. "We'll keep looking," he assured her. "We won't rest until we find him." The search continued throughout the day, extending to the surrounding woods and neighboring villages, but there was no trace of the puppeteer. It was as if he had disappeared into the shadows from which he came. The village remained on edge, the relief of the children's return tempered by the knowledge that Mr. Grimaldi was still out there somewhere. Days turned into weeks, and the initial fervor of the search began to wane. The villagers returned to their daily lives, but the memory of the puppeteer's evil lingered. Parents kept a closer watch on their children, and the toy shop remained abandoned, a grim reminder of the horrors that had taken place within its walls. Despite the passage of time, Sarah never stopped looking over her shoulder, always alert for any sign of the man who had taken her brother. The other children, too, were haunted by their experiences, their innocence forever tainted by the puppeteer's dark magic. Father Matthias continued to support the village, offering counsel and comfort to those who needed it. He warned the villagers to remain vigilant and to remember that while they had driven the darkness away, it could always return. One evening, as Sarah tucked Ben into bed, he looked up at her with wide, solemn eyes. "Do you think he's gone for good?" he asked quietly. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know, Ben, but I do know that we're stronger now. We faced him once, and if we have to, we'll do it again." Ben nodded, seeming to draw strength from her words. As Sarah turned off the light and closed the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that the puppeteer was still out there, watching and waiting. And so the village of Ravenswood returned to its quiet existence, forever changed by the events of that dark autumn. The legend of the puppeteer became a cautionary tale, whispered among the villagers to remind them of the darkness that once gripped their hearts and the strength they found to overcome it. Mr. Grimaldi, the sinister doll maker, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the chilling memory of his deeds. The villagers remained vigilant, always ready to protect their own, knowing that evil could return at any time. But for now, they held on to their hope in each other, their bond stronger than ever before.